Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Skip Mason,
pastor, preacher, historian, author,
teacher, librarian, archivist, world traveler,
collector, family historian, avid reader, and creator of the popular Vanishing Black Atlanta Facebook page.
With a lot of folks who love history.
Most importantly, he's our dad, who loves his family and who taught us the importance of our history and having important conversations.
Join him now for this episode of Conversations with Dr. Skip.
Well, good Sunday afternoon, my brothers and my sisters. I'm so delighted to share with you another CME 150 Facebook Live conversation on this, the last Sunday in January. Can you believe that January is just about over? I'm so delighted to be with you, and we have a wonderful panel of guests that will come and share with you about one of the greatest educational institutions in the world, the Interdenominational Theological Center, otherwise known as ITC. But before I bring up our esteemed guest, let me greet our Senior Bishop, Lawrence Reddick, and Mrs. Wendy Jones Reddick. Excuse me. Let me also greet the College of Bishops and their spouses, Bishop Kenneth Wayne Carter, who is the chair of the College of Bishops. Let me greet Bishop James Walker, who chairs the CIT committee, and Mrs. Walker, and my bishop, Bishop Thomas Lewis Brown, and Dr. Louise Baker Brown. I'm always appreciative of their support. Let me also thank Dr. Teresa Duhart for her tremendous support in doing so many wonderful things for this show and for our church. There are a couple of announcements that I want to share with you before we begin. Certainly, the CME Church has lost a pioneer in the name of Reverend Dr. Ditsy West. Dr. West had the distinction of being the first female presiding elder in the 3rd Episcopal District, as well as the first female to receive a doctorate in ministry, as well from the 3rd Episcopal District. And a few months ago, I had the opportunity to do a panel on the preachers who are non-African Americans, our white brothers and sisters in the CME Church. She was unable to be with us, but so many people had fond remembrances of her. And so she has been elevated to the ancestral realm. She has gained her wings, and we salute and we remember the Reverend Dr. Ditsy West on this day. I would also want to mention to you that the 5th Episcopal District, under the leadership of Bishop Teresa Jefferson Snorton, is planning their Academy for Public Theology, of which they call Monday Night Academy. This sounds like this is going to be a very interesting program, and you can learn more about it from the website that is scrolling at the bottom, www.academyforpublictheology.com. We're excited. As you know, this is the CYM week, January 31st through February 7th. They have all kinds of events and activities taking place. And so we certainly invite you. You should have received many emails about some of the events that are occurring with this wonderful group and these great presenters. So please, brothers and sisters, try to support them if you can. This week, we lost 2 giants, Hammering Hank Aaron, whose wife, Billy, attended and graduated from one of our CME schools, the Texas College. Hank Aaron died at the age of 83, just a powerhouse in sports and a great philanthropist to many HBCUs. And so we fondly remember Hank Aaron. And it was my personal pleasure to know Mr. Aaron and Miss Billy Aaron. And also this week, we lost one of our queen mothers, the great Cicely Tyson. Permit me to share this brief clip with you.
What does it feel like to be 96 and a legend, Miss Legend?
I'm amazed every single day I live.
you feel like you have more to do?
Yes, that's why I'm still here. I mean, what my life became is not what I expected. I had no idea that I would touch anybody.
When the time comes, what do you want us to remember about you?
I've done my best. That's all.
I tell you, I have been all up in my Cicely Tyson feelings since she passed. I've watched her movies. Today, I shed a tear when I shared with my congregation this morning that pivotal scene at the end of the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman when she makes that long walk to that white water fountain and takes a sip from that. And so we remember and we call out your name, Cicely Tyson, one of the great pioneering actresses of all times. But I'm excited today that we have one of the greatest educational institutions of all times. And we are proud that many of us, a part of the ITC experience.
This world that we live in is ever changing. But one thing that never varies is the need for emerging leaders. People who recognize a need in their communities and do not hesitate to take action. The time is now. Our nations, our children, our environments need you. We cannot continue to disregard misguided leadership. There is an ever-urgent need for Afrocentric and global righteousness in positions of power. At ITC, we develop prophetic problem solvers in several different walks of life. Whether it's nonprofit, congregational leadership, or film, dance, and music.
Some of the most brilliant Black religious scholars in the world are housed here at the ITC and have been housed here at the ITC.
I chose the ITC because the ITC's liberating vision aligned with my sense of call to ministry.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Truly, ITC is the epicenter of Black liberation theology.
Our students are impacting communities globally for the better. Don't ignore your calling. Take action and make a change. ITC welcomes you to join the village of prophetic problem solvers.
My brothers and sisters, what a joy and a pleasure to welcome these distinguished graduates, the president, faculty, alumni president, and distinguished graduates of the Interdenominational Theological Center. Let me say good Sunday afternoon to each of you. I'm so delighted to have you here. You represent the best and the brightest, and each of you will get an opportunity today to share a little about your journey at ITC and what ITC means to the world. We have President Matthew Wesley Williams. We have Dr. F. Keith Slaughter, who is a professor of pastoral care, Reverend Dr. Anita Green, who is an adjunct professor and president of the ITC Alumni Association. And we have two distinguished CME preachers and also alums of ITC and Phillips School of Theology, Reverend Gregory Williams and Reverend Kimberly Walker. Good afternoon again to you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
We're going to begin with you, as we should. Tell us about your journey, not to ITC as a president, but as you matriculated as a student, and then we're going to skip to how you came back to become president of your beloved institution.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you, Dr. Mason, Brother Skip, for this platform where we get to talk about our beloved ITC. And also, I know protocol has been established, but I would be remiss if I did not also give a great deal of honor to Bishop Mrs. Reddick, to the College of Bishops, and also especially the Board of Trustees chair at the ITC, Bishop Teresa Jefferson Snowden. So it's good to be in community with our CME family. So to go to your question, Dr. Mason, I was born and raised in Chicago, and I jumped in a rusty Honda about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago now, after having chosen the ITC. And let me just say a little bit about that choice. I came up in a congregation that every first Sunday, as a part of its communion confession, confessed there is no task more sacred than the liberation of Black people. And God has called us to this task, right? I discovered my call to ministry in that context, right? So when I was preparing to go to seminary and thinking about where I would go, I wanted to find a seminary that lined up with how God had called me. In fact, I had a full ride to go to a prestigious white divinity school, and chose to forego that full ride because of the question of alignment. How has God called me? And to whom has God called me? And where can I go to prepare? My dad always said, I can tell what you think about the people you serve by how well you prepare to serve them. And I knew I needed to be prepared in a place that was aligned with how God had called me to the work of the sacred task of Black liberation. So I jumped in that rusty Honda, came down thinking I would do my 3 years and be gone. And I've been in Atlanta ever since.
Wow.
But ITC became a place for me to ask the questions that I couldn't even ask in the church, that helped me to deconstruct and reconstruct my relationship to the sacred and my relationship to that sacred task of what does it take as a person that's called to follow in the way of Jesus, but also lead communities in following in that way. What does it mean to be an African descended person in the context of empire, right? And to develop the kinds of skills, critical skills in terms of thinking and interpretation, but also the constructive skills to actually build healthy communities within communities that have undergone oppression and trauma generation over generation over generation. How might I do that? And ITC could not have been a better place for me to do that. I often say that I made about 2 really good decisions in my adult life. One was marrying my wife, Alexis. The other was attending the ITC. It literally changed and saved my life.
That's great, Doc. Listen, do you remember some of the professors? Can you call the roll just a moment of some of those professors that turned your life inside out while you were a student at ITC?
Well, even before I became a student at ITC, the first professor with whom I had a relationship was Randall Bailey. And anyone who spent any time under the tutelage of Randall Bailey knows he would turn your head and your mind inside out, because everything you thought you knew, he helps you to he helped me to, while maintaining my sense of purpose, passion, and call, lean into an intellectual humility and curiosity that enabled me to seek out the kinds of answers that I was looking for, recognizing that the biblical text could be a conversation partner, right? In that struggle and in that wrestle. So Randall Bailey first was my first person. Riggins Earl, Dr. Earl, who's still there, who we were in a course on Saturdays, critical theory and methods, where we wrestle with texts like Truth and Method, Hans-Georg Gadamer, and Significations, Charles Long, where he took a small group of us and worked us into becoming the kind of critical and constructive theologians that we had hoped to be, and helped us to understand what the work is of theological and religious scholarship. Then, of course, there's Dr. Jacqueline Grant, who, in her wise womanist way, kept creating opportunities for me to unpack my socialization as a man in a cesspool of toxic masculinity, and to understand how that had translated into toxic theology, right? And created more and more spaces for me as a student who she saw some promise in, to reckon with those tensions, and again begin to be more constructive in looking at how the culture and my theology might be in conversation to construct something that is actually more life-giving, whole, and healthy for all of God's people. So those are the three. There were plenty of more.
Absolutely.
Those are the three names I'll call today.
Well, you have called a roster of tremendous names of professors who influenced many of us.
Yes.
So after ITC, tell us about your career, your profession, some of the things that you did in between before you returned back to ITC as the president.
So I spent my first job out of seminary was actually in public health. I was at Morehouse School of Medicine, and I was coordinating the work of 16 cancer coalitions in the South, from North Carolina to Texas, working on cancer health disparities in an organization called the National Black Leadership Initiative on Cancer. The interesting thing about that was I needed a job when I left seminary. And now I had been a pastor, student pastor, associate pastor in 5 congregations before I even got to seminary. And then also was, in pastoral ministry while I was in seminary. But my first job out of seminary was not in a church, right? However, in that job, working in the South on cancer health disparities, what I saw was that we could not do the work of community education, policy education, social behavioral research. We could not do that in the South without going through the church, right? Mm-hmm. And so it helped me to understand, beyond what happens on Sunday morning, the role of the congregation in the life of the well-being and the life of the community, particularly around these persistent problems such as health disparities that we face. So spent 3 years at Morehouse School of Medicine, and then made a transition to what is now called the Forum for Theological Exploration. Mm-hmm. I spent 15 years at FTE and ended my time there as Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. And FTE was established back in 1954, primarily as a means of tapping the next generation of leaders for the church and for the academy, and became over time one of the primary channels through which Black theological and religious scholars were funded and mentored and really put in the pipeline to address the diversity deficit in theological education. Mm-hmm. And so for a good 15 years, I spent time at a helicopter level within the field, creating and facilitating and overseeing programming about $8 million a year that helped to mentor young leaders, create opportunities for vocational exploration, to work alongside venerable elders like you see there, Dr. Vincent Harding and others who are pouring into the lives of young people, and also to create, to do the work of faculty formation with a focus on people of color, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly with Black and brown folks who are making their way into the academy, which is often a means through which folks are pursuing their theological vocation behind enemy lines, right?
Yes.
And so these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion were front and center for our work at FTE. But more importantly, what we were doing was creating spaces for folks to really reimagine the kind of leadership that we need, and what are the kind of means and methods we need to cultivate that leadership through the institutions of the church, the academy, and otherwise. So spent that time at FTE for 15 years. And in the fall of 2018, was asked by the then president, after having been authorized by the board, to lead a task force in light of the changing landscape of theological education in the church in North America, and I would dare say globally. How are we called now as an institution, right, as ITC? How are we now positioned within this changing landscape? What futures might we envision, and what might be a strategic direction to get there, right? And so that task force took up that task, and from the outset, one of the things that we said was, we're clear that our task is not to save or restore the ITC as we know it. Our task is to begin the process of co-creating the ITC our communities and our churches need.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. It's a brand new day. And there's so many fields that are disrupted and destabilized, and theological education is one of them, where schools all across the 270 accredited ATS accredited schools with the Association of Theological Education are trying to figure out, how do we serve this present age? Because it is not like the age that we were established in, right? And so that's really the question that's driving where we are today. So after that period of about 7 months leading that task force, our past president, dearly beloved Ed Wheeler,
yes,
made his way back into retirement. And I was asked to consider being the interim. And at first I said I'll consider it, then I felt called to it.
Yeah.
I came on back home. And so I was appointed interim in July of, started as interim in July of 2019, was appointed to the permanent presidency in June of 2020.
And you have hit the ground running. We're going to come back to you shortly and talk about some of the things that are taking place under your leadership and what you envision for ITC and for African American seminaries. Thank you so much, President Williams.
Thank you.
Dr. F. Keith Slaughter is a towering personality at ITC. Let me share this with you by way of presenting this great scholar, Dr. Slaughter. I don't know who he paid to do that, but I'm going to hire them so that they can put one together for me. Dr. Slaughter, unmute yourself so that we can hear from you. We're so delighted to have you. Or did I mute you? Hold on just a second. There we go. Okay, I think you unmuted now. Dr. Slaughter, tell us about your journey to ITC. Okay. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I hear you okay. I just can't see me anymore. But
okay, well we can see you and we can hear you.
I guess I don't need to see me. All right, I'm well. All right.
All right.
I came to ITC around the same time, I think a year after President Williams did. And let me just say, extend greetings to each of my colleagues who are on this show with me tonight. I came to ITC from Chicago, Illinois, where I had been a pastor of a small church and a social worker, a mental health case manager on the west and south sides of Chicago. And from that experience, I moved into working as a director of several Head Start programs on the south side of Chicago. Upon coming to ITC, or coming to Atlanta, moving to Atlanta, because, well, Goody Mob called everybody to move to Atlanta. So I moved to Atlanta after having, in my background, having graduated from Tuskegee University, which is right down the highway, and we would often visit here. And this was a place where I felt called to come. And so my family and I moved here in 1999. By 2001, I was in my first semester at the Interdenominational Theological Center. I was a Baptist preacher. I pastored a small Baptist church right off Bankhead when I first moved here. And at the Baptist Ministers Conference, I happened to hear a preacher one Monday afternoon. His name was William T. Perkins. And at that time, he was the president dean of the Morehouse School of Religion. I was impressed, and I had never heard anyone speak with such power and conviction before. And I asked him, where did he learn to preach like that? Because I was a Baptist preacher. I wanted to learn how to preach better. And he said, come on by my office. And so I had my first son on my shoulder, and I walked into his office, and he directed me into how to become a student at the Interdenominational Theological Center. And that's actually how I got there. It was just me hearing someone and me responding to that personality and hearing the call. And once I set foot on the campus, I've never really left since I first set foot on campus. I've been there basically for the last 20-some years.
That's an incredible record. And now you are a professor of pastoral care. Talk about that for just a moment, Dr. Slaughter.
Well, I currently serve in the position as assistant professor of the psychology of religion.
Okay.
The same William T. Perkins, who was instrumental in me coming to the Interdenominational Theological Center, Morehouse School of Religion, was also, as fate would have it, I ended up, after completing my Master of Divinity degree and completing the Doctor of Theology degree through Morehouse School of Religion and the Interdenominational Theological Center and the Atlanta Theological Association through the ITC. After spending a couple of years in my first professorship at the American Baptist College as the founding faculty chair of the Master of Pastoral Studies program at American Baptist College, I moved back to Atlanta to pastor the church where that video came from. So while there, I had just been looking for an opportunity to perhaps become an adjunct professor, pick a class or two at the ITC while I was serving as pastor at a large church in Decatur. Well, as fate would have it, I met with one of the past presidents, Brother Dr. Peters. And during that meeting, the president dean of the then Baptist School of Theology had resigned 15 minutes before I walked in the office. Wow. And President Ronald Peters, asked me, did I love the Lord when I walked in the office? I said, yes. He asked me would I want to become the interim president dean of the Baptist School of Theology. And I told him I'd think about it, and I thought about it, and I said yes. My work then began to attempt to help a fledgling institution in its first year of existence take wings, while a looming shadow of that which was its past continue to call out for a historical corrective. And so what ended up happening is, in the wake of President Peters leaving as president of the ITC, the leadership, Dr. Edward P. Wembley, a mentor, as well as Charles J. King, who was then president of the Board of Trustees, and I collaborated in order to bring Morehouse School of Religion back to the campus. And so for me, one of the most important things that I've been able to accomplish in my life is to be able to come to ITC and to restore alma mater, Morehouse School of Religion, to the consortium. And from there, of course, as administrations change, things change, and I found myself now being proud to serve as the pastor of the beloved Community Church of Atlanta, and serve as assistant professor of the psychology, religion, and pastoral care in the department that is led by the mother of pastoral care, African American pastoral care, who is Dr. Carolyn McCrary, and being able to serve with the people who taught me what it is that I know about the psychology of religion, about providing care for people, about being hungry for liberation and wanting liberation for Black people, and seeing a theological route to get us to the destination, which is ultimately freedom and liberation for Black people in this country.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What a tremendous and rich history, and we applaud you too for the Herculean effort that you led with the Morehouse School of Religion. I was a student at ITC at the time, and so I remember that well. Certainly, but your heart is in preaching. We know that you like to preach. Take a look at this clip for just a moment, please.
I saw you when you thought nobody else was looking, and guess what? I still want to use you. Jeremiah said, "Oh Lord God, I don't know what to say because I'm only a boy." Listen at me, Jeremiah came from a line of preachers. He was the son, the text said, of Hilkiah, a preacher, and is reported to be a descendant of Abiathar, the preacher who was banished from Solomon's court because he told Solomon what he really thought. You know, folks in power don't like you telling them what you really think. So he ended up in Anathoth, about 3 miles northeast from Jerusalem. He ended up preaching in Hermitage.
Well, you'll have to go on YouTube to finish the rest of that sermon. When a preacher starts taking off clothing items, you know it's on and popping. but you enjoy preaching.
I mean, it's African American rhetorical tradition. You know, it's the African American Baptist rhetorical pastoral tradition to address to an extent. I mean, I think a dude named David did it first, but I came to ITC because I wanted to learn how to be a better preacher. I knew nothing to be very honest with you. Before coming to Atlanta, I had not been exposed to the idea of higher theological education. And so I find myself now still as in my niche. I'm a practical theologian. I'm a pastoral theologian. And when I first came to ITC, I think Robert Franklin was the president. And his mantra at the time was to teach us to be public theologians.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been the mantra that has kind of guided how it is that I have engaged theology as a public theologian, as a radio talk show host, as a preacher who preaches in different places and who has had the opportunity to preach in different places around the country and the world. What I've attempted to do is to take what it is that I learned at ITC and to spread it around the world, because I just so happen to believe that Black preaching is the key to unlocking the door of liberation for Black people. The church is the only place that Black people come voluntarily. Every place else we go, we have to go. We come to church voluntarily. And we come looking for something. And so
yes.
I just began to think that, and I began to think that if people voluntarily come to a place, wouldn't it make sense for Black leaders to tell them the truth when they get there? Wouldn't that be something novel?
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a text about it called Therapeutic Dimensions of Black Preaching, how it is that the healing that we aspire to as a people, the healing that we need as a people, is accessible. And the most efficient way of delivering that is through the preached word in a space where people voluntarily gather. That's the place to get the healing done, because we won't voluntarily, for the most part, go into spaces into what I call the little room for one-on-one psychological therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But we will go to church, and that's the place. If the homily is correctly constructed with the idea of bringing about psychological healing in the midst of a theological enterprise, then we have the intersectionality of the word and the healing that we wish to extract from the word. So that's got me where I am, in the position that I am. I painted myself into a corner and just happen to believe that Black people deserve quality preaching. And that's how I got to the place that I am, painted into this corner, Brother Skip.
That's great. I feel like I'm sitting back in you and Dr. McCrae's class again after that. Tremendous progression of your story. We'll be back to you shortly. Reverend Dr. Nita Green, you are the alumni president, but you're also a graduate and an adjunct professor. Tell us about your journey at ITC.
Well, first of all, I want to again say thank you, Dr. Skip, and greetings to President Williams and my colleagues that are also on this platform. My journey started, I actually went somewhere else before I came to ITC, and I'm originally I moved here from England and was kind of new to everything, and the idea came up that I needed to go to seminary. And I ended up going to another seminary because I got money to go. And my first semester there was like the worst that I have ever had. No one wanted to connect. I didn't form any relationships, not even with professors. So it's like I just went through the motions of going to class and going back home. And then it clicked toward the end of that semester that I should have gone to ITC like it was put out to me. So many people talked about ITC, and I went to registration, and it was like, just a whole new world that opened up. The campus was lively and jumping. People were all around. Went in the chapel for registration, and everybody was just smiling and happy and welcoming. And then after I registered for my classes, there were other students that were hanging around. And the first thing they said was, let me see your schedule. What are you taking? Do you have your books? If not, I can loan you some books. Make sure you give them back or you can keep them. Do you need papers? Whatever you need. to help you in your journey. And the only thing that they asked was that I just give back in return, pay it forward in return. And so that's what I did. And, once I got involved, even though I did not live on campus, I still made sure I got involved, because when I came to campus, I was happy. I was excited. I wanted to do as much as I could, be a part of as much as I could at ITC and on campus. And I did that, SCL, female student rep. I was involved in each of my graduating class participation, when we planned for graduation. Then when I started working on my DMin, I had the opportunity to work out my project, which is in the area of African American women in grief. So I had the opportunity to work out my project. Thank you to Dr. Slaughter, who's one of my mentors, and Dr. McCrary, who gave me the opportunity to teach my project in the pastoral care classes. Had an opportunity of being a teaching assistant in Baptist history and Baptist Poly with Dr. Slaughter. It was, I want you to help with the syllabus. Then, you teach the class, you read, you have to know what you're talking about. And so that became a catalyst for me being an adjunct professor at another seminary. But I really credit ITC for giving me the opportunity to work out what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so, being an adjunct professor and then working out my grief work in several areas, just really, give credit to my ITC experience. Also serving as the chairperson of the professional advisory group for chaplaincy at Grady Hospital, which, I work with the supervisor there, as well as sign off on the educational and clinical components when it's time for accreditation, and meeting with students to serve as a voice for them when, for residents and interns, serving as a voice for them when, they have issues or concerns. And so I really, really credit ITC for just getting me involved in ministry and for just bringing excitement for, what I do. And, sometimes I would be on campus like every day just to, go and say hi to somebody, just to stop by, just to be, on campus, walking around campus. But, I just enjoyed it and still enjoy it.
Wow, that's great. What a great experience. And when we come back, we're going to have you talk about the work as the Alumni Association president. Reverend Kimberly Walker, so glad to have you, pastor of the Bold Springs Church, a graduate of ITC through Phillips School of Theology. Tell us about your ITC years, your Phillips School of Theology years.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mason, for this invitation, and greetings to you, President Williams, and my other colleagues on staff, as well as my other CME colleague, Reverend Williams. The way I came to the ITC, honestly, was completely by accident. I was looking at 3 Methodist schools, and I was already ordained and already on this journey of trying to discover where God wanted me to be in terms of my calling. I had already been, as you know, I'm CME, and so I had already been assigned to churches. And so by the time I got to the ITC, I had already pretty much, before I got to the ITC, I should say, I had decided upon one particular school. I had visited 2 schools. I decided on one, was just awed by the beauty of the campus, was heavily recruited by those 2 schools. And then I went to the presiding elder Woodfork's pastor's appreciation, and Dr. Love Henry Welchel was the preacher. And at the time, I had never met Dr. Welchel, and I had never heard him preach. And so when I heard this, he combined philosophy and church history and just all of this vast knowledge in preaching. I had never heard preaching like that before. And I decided that day, I was like, where, looking at his bio, where does he teach? And so I think at the time, I think he was just leaving Clark and headed over to the ITC. And I made my decision at that point, after listening to him, that I wanted to be under his tutelage. And so the deadline actually was that week. So I called the recruiter to see, I had already gotten my Episcopal endorsements. And so I called the recruiter to see if I could walk my application over. I walked my application to the ITC that last day of the deadline. And mind you, I have never been to the campus of the ITC, didn't know where it was. I'm a native Atlantan, had been up and down Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, grew up at a church, as you know, Dr. Mason, down the street from the ITC, spent my high school summers at Clark College in math and science program. So I walked up and down Morehouse, Spelman, Morris Brown, walked up and down Fair Street all the time, did not know where the ITC was. My first day was when I walked my application over to the recruiter. And then he said, well, can you come tonight to our dinner? We're having a dinner for our incoming students. And I said, sure. So I left work at Georgia State, came over, went to dinner, and I did not look back, even though I had a full ride to those other two schools that I was considering. And the first thing I did, I went out of order. I wasn't supposed to be in Dr. Welch's class, but I didn't want to risk not taking his course. And I remember enrolling his course the first semester I got there. And another student says, you just getting here? You're not supposed to be in this class. This class is going to be a little bit too difficult for you. But I was determined. I wanted to learn everything I could under him. And I didn't want to risk waiting until I got to be a senior before I had an opportunity to be under his tutelage. And see, at the time I had been reading about Al Rabbitoh. I had been reading James Cone. I had been reading C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence Mamiya. I was, reading all of these things, but I wanted to understand how African descended people, what was their impact and what was their legacy of creating these religious institutions here in America and in fact, globally. And while I was reading a lot of the historical religious piece, I knew of womanism from the Black women's literary tradition, and I knew of feminism from the political, people like reading about Angela Davis and so forth. But I did not realize until I got to the ITC the impact of womanism in theological circles. And the very first semester, I also read Dr. Jacqueline Grant, White Women's Christ, Black Woman's Jesus. And I remember, I had marked up my Black Power and Black Theology book that I found that was actually in my father's library. It was first printing a 1969 copy of James Cone's book. I had marked it up and I was like, who is this Bark and Tillich that he keeps talking about? And I knew that I could learn these things at the other institutions that I went to. But then when that book made such an impact on me and where I was going. And so then by the time I got to the ITC and to see the womanist impact of their critique of the Black liberation movement, I knew I had found the right place. I remember sitting in one of the classes of one of the institutions I visited, and nobody addressed anything or any type of impact of people who looked like me. And I knew then that wasn't the place I was supposed to be. And so I never regretted coming to the ITC. I have my friends and circle of friends and colleagues and collaborations that I do across many different arenas come from that strong network and that strong community and foundation that I had. And in fact, the first, as you're showing the picture, I had both Dr. Welcho, African American Church History, and CME polity that first semester. So I was getting a double dose, but I was determined that I wanted to understand what people of color and the impact they made. At the ITC, I took pilgrimages to both Egypt and in fact, Dr. Green was one of my roommates, one of the pilgrimages to Greece. And so I am just so thankful and grateful for this opportunity to be immersed in such a community that is both welcoming and affirming to who I am as a person and as a Christian minister. And so I'm just grateful for this opportunity. And now I'm kind of back as the Academy cohort leader as well, working in ministry and context. And so I'm just grateful to the ITC community. There's no place like it on earth.
That's great, Kim. Thank you. Reverend Walker, we go back.
Yes,
we grew up in the same church together, yes. West Side Community, CME Church. Reverend Gregory Williams, unmute yourself, my brother. And you've been having a few technical issues, but I'm so glad that you are still with us. Tell us about your ITC journey. And your journey actually started somewhat indirectly before you became a student at ITC.
Well, first of all, Dr. Williams, President Williams and I shared in our experience together, and it's good to see you, and I'm proud to have you as my president right now. My relationship with ITC began even before I was born. My relationship began with ITC, and forgive me for having my wedding picture back, but maybe y'all look at me a little bit better having my wedding picture behind me. But
we know that was strategic placement, Greg. We know that.
yeah, I had to move my situation closer to my router. But my dad was in the very first class of the ITC. He was in the very first graduating class of the ITC. My father, Dr. W. Clyde Williams, and Harvey Richardson writes about him in his book that after he graduated, he asked my dad to be director of recruiter, not only director of recruitment, but director of admissions, and later became one of the first registrars of the ITC. So I had no choice whether or not I was going to be an ITC alum. So I really started this process. That's me on the ground, the youngest one. We started this process knowing that I was a part of the ITC legacy. I was a part of the ITC family, knowing that my father had already been there and graduated from ITC and Phillips School of Theology. So it was no question after I finished college what I was going to do and where I was going to go. I was so thankful to be in then Dean Thomas Brown's final graduating class before he was elected bishop. And so there was a kindred relationship there. But what ITC has done for me is really been able to expand my idea of ecumenism. It has allowed me to sit in classrooms with people of other faith traditions, people of other denomination traditions, and really understand and see their work and how their theology shapes the work that they do. You see a picture of Dr. L.H. Welcher, who is a member of the Power of Good News Church that I pastor, and also my professor of African church, Black church history at the ITC. And we're just so thankful to be able to do public ministry and public theology from a context out of a theological tradition that allowed me, after graduating, to work in community organizing. After I graduated, years later, we became the president of ABLE, Atlantans Building Leadership for Empowerment. And President Williams was one of our faithful supporters in that movement. And being a community organizer, working on issues of healthcare, working on transportation equity, working in issues of wealth equity in the Black community and underserved communities, we were able to work with AMEs and Baptists. And many of the people that we were working with, even post-graduation, I was sharing in ministry with and learning and sitting in the same classrooms with. So it wasn't a situation where I was going to have to get to know people. I was already familiar with them because they were already working with us in that theological setting. I'm just thankful for Professor Dr. Mark Lomax, my preaching professor. He was one of the ones that told me to sit down after I got up, started preaching and heeing and hawing and sweating. And then he said, man, sit down. and he began to shape my homiletical personality in a way that caused me to really, really look at what the preaching moment is always about. I remember Dr. Lomax would always talk about place and setting. He would always say, paint the picture. And he gave us this production of ministry, this production of this homiletical moment that allowed us to see what Black preaching should look like. Dr. Edward Smith, God rest his soul, had a swagger that I was so impressed with. He had this swagger about him as he taught
Yes, sir.
us about process theology and taught us about systematic theology. And I mean, it goes back to how important it is to be taught theology from people who know your culture, who've been where you've been, and who have been where you are going. So I'm thankful for my sister, Kimberly Walker, amen, and all of you all, Dr. Slaughter, God bless you we met over in your building. And I was just a child when I was at Morris Brown, Dr. Mason. I would go over to ITC into Phillips School of Theology and run around with Wayne Williams and run around with John Paisley and all those guys. So I was like the little brother on the scene. And when I became a student, Dean Brown made sure, Bishop, made sure that I graduated. Amen. And when I crossed that threshold of graduation, we all embraced that we made it over.
Wow.
Amen, amen, amen. What a blessed morning it is. We're so thankful that God allowed us to exercise our patriotic duty and go out and vote in record numbers. Thank you all to the workers, the poll workers, the ones who were on the grassroots work, the coalitions that were built. Thank you to all of those who did the work to get us to where we are now. But now the real work begins, and that work is reuniting our country, bringing everyone together for this pandemic that's going on, economic justice, social justice, so many issues that we have that we need to focus on, and not the rhetoric that we hear from those who do not share our values. It is time that Republicans and Democrats, black, white, people of all faiths come together so that we can bring this country back together out of the division that we've experienced for the past 4 years. It is our time. It is God's time. It's a Kairos time. Let's get to work. God bless you.
Lord, my brother, I tell you, we joke often about how pastoral and how political and how preachy sometimes we sound, but I am very proud of Greg and the work that he did along with many other CME preachers in the background, helping to rally the crowd throughout the state of Georgia to vote. So President Williams, you have heard these testimonies, and there are perhaps thousands of them over the years of students who have graduated from ITC. Everyone has their story. They have those professors that inspired them. You had mentioned Randall Bailey, of course, and Dr. Riggins Earl. I didn't have their pictures pulled up at the time, but I certainly wanted to acknowledge those two as well, because they were also two of my professors. How do you take all of this positiveness and use it as fuel to move ITC forward?
So there's a term that we hold dear and sacred. There really is a North Star for how we operate at the ITC, and that is Sankofa. That means to go back and fetch the best of our lineages and legacies in order to craft a future that we long for, right? And so what our testimonies, and I just want to say a big word of appreciation to my dear friends and colleagues who've given these testimonies like I have about the impact that ITC had. These testimonies, I think, are they give some flesh and muscle to this thing we call the ITC in terms of understanding how it operates and how it literally changes the way folks see the world, right? And one of the things that when you go back and fetch the best of ITC's legacies, when you look at ITC's founding, right, in 1958, on the heels of the the catalytic impact of the Montgomery bus boycott and Emmett Till's lynching and the Brown versus Board decision and the beginnings of an upheaval, a rise and a kind of a climax of activity in the mid-50s. ITC was the coming together of the Black church to address this issue of how can we better prepare clergy to lead these sacred communities, right? And this push for an educated clergy that was prepared to serve and to lead and could preach and teach in ways that actually were suited for our people was front and center in the minds and in the hearts of those who started ITC, led by Harry V. Richardson at that time. But you come about 20 years later, and as Black power and Black liberation found its way into the academy, Black studies began to change the nature of how we did theology. And we began to ask these questions about what does theology, what does Bible, what does ethics, what does pastoral care or psychology, what do all of these fields have to do with the liberation of Black people? Not to mention the well-being of Black people. And so Black liberation theology, womanist theology, and the emergence of theological perspectives rooted in our experiences, our histories, our communities began to emerge. Now, here we are in 2021, dealing with a pandemic that has torn the facade off of the disparities, the oppression, the trauma that our people have been experiencing generation after generation, where police brutality is as virulent as it has ever been, where there was literally an insurrection, reminiscent of what you found in 1898 in Wilmington, but now not at a local government or state government, but at the U.S. Capitol, right? And you found not only was that a kind of a political move, but there were placards that said Jesus 2020, right? That somehow conjoined Christianity with the legacy of the Confederacy, which some folks call the lost cause. So here we are in this moment. And the question is, given the richness of what we've just described in terms of how ITC helped us to ground our theological perspectives and our leadership and our ministry in what our folks need, and how to create healthy communities in light of the context that we're operating in. In this moment, we've begun to interpret the mission again as an African-centered, Afrocentric, ecumenical consortium of seminaries and fellowships that prepares women and men through a liberating and transforming spirituality to become leaders, practicing peace and justice. Now we've come to interpret that mission in an educational aim that we talk about as preparing prophetic problem solvers, right? Prophetic problem solvers. Now, what does that mean? That means that historically, it means really reimagining the nature and purpose of theological education, right? Whereas historically, we might be able to say that theological education helps to prepare a professional class of folks who are theologically trained in a particular way to play leadership roles in certain congregations, organizations, and otherwise. When we talk about what it means to be a prophetic problem solver, it actually draws on the best of what you've heard among these testimonies, which is how do we prepare women and men to go into communities and help to build alternatives to the status quo, right? To take the critical theological reflection that they've been in from an African-centered perspective, and then pair those with constructive tools to build communities, to build alternative systems, that address the perennial challenges that our people face when it comes to public health and health disparities, when it comes to food and land security, when it comes to political empowerment. All of those kinds of things require us to be able to think at a systemic level, and then not to just be able to, as we say, speak truth to power, but actually to design the reality we want to see in a theologically rooted and a culturally relevant way, right? That actually solves for problems as opposed to solely pointing out them, right? And so that's where we're headed, and that calls for a different kind of approach to theological education that's not just rooted in interpretation, or does not just lead one to be a master of a body of knowledge, but leads us to actually gain the kinds of tools that we need to address the on-the-ground issues that face our people. Now, what that does not mean is that we also we become a theological institution that chooses the practical over the theological or the theoretical. Mm-hmm. What that means is we actually deny the legitimacy of that bifurcation. We say it's not the practical or the theoretical, it's the pairing of the two in the solving of problems with, again, a critical lens that leads to constructive action that builds new systems in which our people thrive and have abundant life.
You held a workshop shortly after you arrived. I think it was called Vision 2.0. And you gathered members of the ITC community, stakeholders, including alumni, teachers, faculty, staff, students, etc. I had the opportunity to share, and it was such an enlightening event. And so from that, you created this graphic, this guide.
Yes.
Can you talk just a moment about what this is, what it means for ITC and its future, and for you as the president?
Yes, sir. So thank you for raising this. This was indeed a Sankofa moment, and you see the Sankofa bird situated at the center of this graphic. But this graphic depiction, it was a live graphic capturing of what was happening in the room. About 100 folks that included students, alumni, community stakeholders, pastors, board members, faculty, you name it. A kind of representative sample of the ITC village was present. And the name of this, what we called that gathering, was the Village Visioning Day. So we spent a full day really asking three questions that you see kind of depicted there. One was, what do our communities need? Well, first of all, it was, what is the ITC? What can the ITC provide? And what does the ITC offer uniquely that you can't get anywhere else, right? The second question was, what do our communities need from the ITC? And then we use those two questions as a starting point to begin to envision futures that took the best of the legacy of the ITC up to this point and begin to explore what possibilities there might be. So this image is really an image of a kind of theory of change we call the two-loop theory, where that first loop looks at how our legacy systems, the systems of established influence, rise and they fall, right? And there's a time in which we are at the peak of our noonday power, which for the field of theological education, or Protestant theological education in North America, was really about the third quarter of the 20th century, from the 1950s on to about the 1980s. And that was a high time, right? And it was a high time that was designed for a particular moment. But the structures, the systems, the approaches, and this is true across the board in theological education, that were vital then are now becoming decrepit. All right, because the landscape has changed, the ground has shifted. And so now the question becomes, how do we provide hospice care to declining institutions and forms of theological education and in even the church? And then how do we begin to plant seeds and begin to nurture the new systems and approaches and alternatives that want to emerge and really are already among us? I heard one person say the future is already here, it's just not widely distributed, right? So how do we begin to notice the stuff that's underground, that's simmering, the ways in which people are congregating differently, the ways in which the church looks different, the ways in which millennials and post-millennials are thinking about what it means to be communities of faith, spiritual communities, and then begin to nourish that in the direction of an emerging system of influence. And so that's what that begins to track and begins to ask the question now, what does ITC look like in this emerging moment where all bets are off, right? The norms that we used to think were like the law of gravity are now called into question. So what do we do in this moment of uncertainty and destabilization where everything seems to be up for grabs? And it's a moment that COVID-19 has accelerated, right? So what do we do in this moment? It means we need to get in our imagination. It means that we need to get into a space where we can admit we don't know, right? And begin to pay attention in ways and begin to experiment in ways that help us to begin to forge a future one step at a time together. And so that process was a testament to the fact that we are not in a moment where we can claim that we can download this knowledge from an expert in the room, right? Because we're in a moment where their expertise has a limited utility. We're in a moment that requires us to confess that the smartest person in the room is the room itself. And we have to have ways. So when we talk about prophetic problem solvers, we're not talking about folks who are swooping in like heroes to save the day. We're talking about folks who can sit down in the community and not just be engaged in prophetic preaching, but be engaged in prophetic listening well enough to be able to hear the future that wants to emerge among us, and then begin to organize communities in the co-creation of that future and the alternative systems that will bring that future into being.
Wow. Phenomenal experience that was, and even more so now to hear you solidify what occurred that day, mirrored with the vision that you have for ITC. I'm going to share a clip of Dr. Henry Louis Gates' upcoming series on the Black church. And afterwards, and we want to start with you, Dr. Slaughter, and we're going to go around, and I want you to sort of give me your closing thoughts, because people used to say, President Williams, that all ITC did was to prepare Black folks to preach. I mean, that was the nomenclature for ITC. Those of us who have matriculated there, we know better. We know that it does more than that. But I want you, each of you, and Greg, I'll bring you back up, to just sort of, as you give me your closing statement, talk about the future of the Black church and the role of seminary education, because we're talking about a seminary and seminary educated. There may be someone who's watching who is preaching and pastoring, but has not considered seminary, does not see the value in attending seminary, particularly Phillips School of Theology, which is our beloved school, which is what we are still hoping and recruiting for. So let me not get that twisted. We want CME preachers to come to Phillips School of Theology. But take a look at this clip, and then we'll start with you, Dr. Slaughter. We'll go back around, and then we'll end with you, Dr. Williams.
This is our story. Oh, this is our song. Praising my Savior. Oh, all the day long. All the day long. All the day long.
Ah, that is great.
In the name of Jesus today, oh God, we are rising.
The black church was more than just a spiritual home. It was the epicenter of black life. Out of it came our black businesses, our black educational institutions.
The black church gave people a sense of value, belonging, and worthiness. I don't know how we could have survived as a people without it.
To tell the story of American religion is to tell a political story.
The black church helped us to withstand all the slings and arrows of segregation and the segregationists.
We're willing to be beaten for democracy. Freedom!
Who are the 5 great black preachers of all time? There's so many.
Prathia Hall.
Renita Weems.
We serve a Jesus who came and turned over the tables.
Jeremiah Wright. Gardner Taylor.
Howard Thurman.
I left out Otis Moss.
Presiding Bishop Michael Curry.
Love can be sacrificial.
Did you think that you were going to get one amen out of those Brits? I learned how to see amens in their eyes.
I'ma clap my hands. I'ma sing to the Lord.
Some might argue that the black church is the first black theater.
The role of music in the black church is everything.
How do you define gospel music?
Oh, really simple. Gospel music is the sonic presentation that talks about the majesty of Jesus.
Entertainment shouldn't be in the church. What do you think the preacher does?
Yeah,
the preacher, and there, and if what? That's entertainment.
The African American church is 80 to 90% women, but the leadership is 80 to 90% male.
There's an awful price to pay when you say that you're a same-gender loving person.
If you say you were born this way, then you're saying, God, you're a liar.
We are a testament to the goodness and the grace of God. Everything in the world has tried to kill us, and we're still here.
Culture says you the wrong race. The price says I made your race, and I ain't made no mistake.
It was our balm in Gilead, the place where our people made a way out of no way. It was that place from which our souls could look back and wonder how we got over. We call it the church.
So I'm excited to see what Dr. Gates has done. I'll be looking at a critical eye because if ITC is not mentioned and the CME church is not included, I'm gonna have some serious problems with that. But Dr. Slaughter, would you share your thoughts about the black church that was past, the future of the black church from your lens and from where you sit? Unmute yourself. Dr. Slaughter, okay. All right. You just unmuted. Unmute yourself again. There you go. Okay, you're good. We can hear you.
All right. I did hear all of the questions. I'm having some difficulty with the broadcast. However, just to pick up on the part of your question that I heard before, the part that I didn't hear, the great theologian and educator Kelly Miller said that the more or the greater the amount of oppression that the people experience, the more poor and the more destitute that people find themselves, the more educated, the better trained their clergy need to be. And so it's important for us, I think, as clergy persons and persons who feel called to to do ministry, and ministry being service to Black people from our particular context, it becomes important for us to be as well educated and as well trained as possible in order to provide the highest quality service to the persons who seek out that service from us. As Reverend Williams made mention of, President Williams made mention of, the centerpiece of the ITC idea in this iteration of our existence is Sankofa. And yes, I think that it is imperative for us to go back and fetch, and not only fetch, but hold on to and utilize that which has brought us to this point. I heard a little bit of the clip wherein Sister Adams, I think, and I had the great fortune of interviewing her and quite a few of those people that were shown on that video that Dr. Gates interviewed. Yes, preaching is still important, and it will be important moving into our future, if there is a future for Black people, because again, there is a way in which we operate and traffic in the commodity known as narrative. Everybody in every place at every time is telling a story. And as Yolanda Adams said, it's entertainment, but I term it to be sacred performance art. And sacred performance art is that which causes transformation in people. You can package information as it is packaged digitally and deliver it to people, but it doesn't cause a soulish change. Change and transformation occurs through the sharing of narratives and the intersectionality of the narrative being brought to the forefront and people embracing each other around that intersectionality. And so when some might suggest that preaching is a arcane art form, the reality is that almost every forward movement Black people have experienced, it has been as a result of the Black church, wherein Black preaching is the centerpiece of the organization. It evolves around that, and generally, and you know, as a pastor, you know, and a preacher, people who do not do it well do not appreciate it, right? But when you do it well and you attempt to do it well, and when you have done the research to see what it is that has brought about the transformation in the lives of people, then you place a high value on it. From our history, the history that informs what we know now as the preacher. I think about what's the book?
Uh-oh, did we lose him? Okay, well, if he comes back, we will let him continue. Dr. Green, give me your closing thoughts.
I think about what ITC stands for. It says students enter, but leaders depart. And I think about how, you know, the transformation of the student and how we evolve because of our experiences that we have at ITC, that we come to cultivate our gifts. And because of that, we're not just learning to preach to our church members. We're not learning to, you know, to preach to the masses. We're not just learning to preach, but what ITC gives us is just a well-rounded theological education. But also, I think about, what Howard Thurman says, that, we have to meet people at the level of the ashtray. And so we're not preaching just to, craft a sermon, but when we do our sermon, when we're preaching to people, that we must remember we're preaching and we're seeing about their soul, we're seeing about their spirit, we're seeing about their mind, we're seeing about their families, we're seeing about homelessness, we're seeing about, joblessness, we're seeing, about everything that, that people are sitting in the pews that they are in need of. So it's not just, doing a sermon, performing it, but it's what we give that will help people understand that, that we're here for them, that we're here to see about them, that we're here to pay attention to them. Church is not always, and I'm, this is not in a negative way or anything, because, I don't pastor, but, I like to see about the souls of people. I like to, just see, how people are doing, to care for people. And so that's how, that's the angle that I come from, that, we just need to be open to meet people where they are and craft our sermons that will help ease people's burdens, to help ease the pain, to help ease the point of, someone may, be apprehensive about, going back home, because, church could be an outlet. Church could be their safe space and their sacred space where they can come and spend some alone time, where they can come and know that, that they're sitting next to someone that cares about them, or that the word that's being preached is, just for them. So, again, it's the students entering and the leaders depart. When we're leaders coming from ITC, we know about everything. It's not just, an MSR student knowing about MSR history and polity, but we can go and sit in a CME class. We can sit in the AME class. We can, sit in the Richardson Fellowship class. But, we're just well-rounded when we leave the gates of ITC.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Dr. Slaughter, I want you to finish your concluding statement before I go to Reverend Walker. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
All right, we can hear you.
You hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can hear
Very
you.
well.
Yes.
Oh, what I did want to say, and that thought is gone, that I was on that train of consciousness has long left the station. I don't know where that went. But what I can say is that what I have experienced as a pastor during this time of pandemic is that the last thing that people need are your words. At this point in time in our history, what people need and respond to now is the care that we are able to provide. I do ministry in one of the most blighted communities in the city, and I have, before COVID-19, I think, I was playing around, man. I was playing like I was a pastor. I have actually become a pastor now in the midst of this pandemic, because what I have learned is how to try to meet the needs of persons exactly where they are. Somebody made a reference to Howard Thurman and the ashtray level. I can recall, but that's where we have been led to. And I was speaking with a colleague the other day, and what he was saying to me, I had him to come over and be a part of my live streaming show. And what he said was, Slaughter, you doing exactly what it is that we teach at the Interdenominational Theological Center. It's being done right here in this space. And of course, I was, humbled to the point of tears to hear someone that I respected say something like that, because this pandemic has stripped me down to the bones. Do you see?
Yes. Yeah.
I was providing ministry for people, and I didn't know I was providing ministry for. you see, now I have learned in the midst of this crisis, because I mean, and I say this and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody, but I don't do bourgeois ministry. I do street level ministry, you know. And what I have learned is that it is imperative for the pastor, for the minister, to be focused on the provision of service. And the theological education that we receive, more than anything, needs to emerge out of what I learned from Dr. Carolyn A.R. McCrary, which is to know yourself. That's the primary challenge, I think, of theological education, to move people to a modality of theological reflection when you can actually be honest about who you are. And once one is able to have the courage to engage in the self with a sense of authenticity, and then ministry becomes second nature, because I think it is a part of who we are as a people to offer service. From the ITC, what we get is the training, the education, the introduction to critical thinking that will allow us to do the self-introspection that will prepare us to be able to do effective ministry in the community.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for finishing that. Reverend Walker, your closing thoughts, please.
First, I wanted to just kind of piggyback on the Dr. Gates documentary, which I am very interested in seeing his take on how he is going to treat the Black church. We see how the Black church has been politicized and has been demonized within political spheres because of their lack of understanding of what Black liberation looks like, and how the Black church has helped us survive, to be quite honest with you. And you know, in the clip, they alluded to the preaching as entertainment, and I would say that preaching is both an art and skill, and a rhetorical device that still is necessary for these times. But I think that, of course, we have to look at that these pandemic times, which is essentially an exilic period. We have been driven from our temples of worship. We've been driven from our churches, our physical church buildings, and now embody a virtual space. And alluding to what President Williams said, now is the time that we have to take all of these tools of theological education and become prophetic problem solvers in the midst of a pandemic, which has forced us to do ministry in a different way. And I think that as a pastor, you know, we're the boots on the ground. We're the theologians on the ground who must bring forth these ideas from the academy, the ways in which we critically think. And to be honest with you, you know, our people were, even before we were allowed to engage in these academies of education and allowed to even go to institutions where we could interact, we were already critically assessing where we were theologically within this particular society and where we were globally. And so at this point, what we have to do is to begin to reimagine, and President Williams talked about that, reimagine and reimage what the Black church means, what the Black church must do within these times to meet the needs of our people, because our people are distressed.
Yeah.
They are distressed at a level that I think that we have not begun to see, from our children to our seniors. Our children don't know how to process not being able to go to school and not being able to interact with their friends. Our seniors who were perhaps already isolated are further isolated because the technology now is a barrier. And so the pandemic has forced us, I always knew that technology, we were going to have to get there at some point, and somehow churches tend to be late adopters or last adopters of things when the society changes. Mm-hmm. But now we have been forced into taking on this technological skill that we now have to embrace in order to remain connected as a body of Christ. And so ministry has to look different. We're in a different paradigm. The train has taken off. We're in a different space.
Right.
But the need for theological education is so critically important, particularly, and President Williams can speak to this better than I can, when you have presidents of Southern Baptist seminaries who dare to write press releases that disavow intersectionality and critical race theory, and those theories which address the systemic sins that this country and this world has placed upon African descended people and brown people in particular. And so we cannot afford not to utilize the tools of theological education in order to meet the needs of our people. And so I'm grateful, but I must be prayerful and hopeful. And as Dr. Slaughter said, do the introspection, be who you be, if I can quote Dr. God, and be authentic and make sure that we are caring for our people in these very desperate times.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Walker. Reverend Williams, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Dr. Slaughter said when he talks about introspection and knowing yourself. During my seminary education, I had a come to Jesus moment with me. And I realized that even though I loved myself, I had to accept the fact that I'm not all that as a preacher. It was an humbling experience for me. It helped me to walk into a theological humility where I realized that my job as a public theologian is to engage those who would not regularly and usually be engaged. I got in trouble at Holy Temple CME Church back after graduation because I made this statement from the pulpit that I want more people walking to church than driving. I noticed in the parking lot that all of the cars came from outside the perimeter, and there were very few people in the community that were walking to the church. And that moved me towards a space of wondering, how do we get people who are not churchgoers, who are not in the church, who love God, but are not enamored with the church experience? So Dr. Welchel always says to me that the church was not started in the building. It had to leave the building. And when the birth of the Christian church happened and the tongues of fire came down, they were in the streets. Even so, when Jesus came back down from the mountain going towards the cross, the people were thronging him with palms, but the people in the church were telling folk to shut up. And the reality is, we who are in the church have to lead the church. And what my seminary education gave me the tools to be able to go out on Martin Luther King, go up Bankhead Highway, Dr. Slaughter, and do ministry to people who I don't regularly engage on Sunday morning. The other thing that the Black church, I think, is the genius of the Black preacher, is being able to transition when the context changes. We're in a brand new paradigm, a brand new context. The church now is no longer gathered. The church is now scattered. We're looking at social media. We're looking at doing ministry to people who are not only unchurched or dechurched, but they are never churched. So how do we connect to the never churched population in our own communities? The other thing I think that's important that the Black church looks at is our public engagement in politics. This past election season, I had the opportunity to work with the Congress of National Black Churches and go into some areas that we usually don't engage politically within our community. We went down to Willacoochee, Georgia, the Black Belt of Georgia, Southwest Georgia, Southeast Georgia. And we did a massive get out the vote campaign. And I have no doubt that that's why Georgia is blue through and through. Now, I'm not trying to be partisan, but we engaged people that were not enamored with the process of public ministry. So I think as I close, I think the Black church, it has a genius in it. The genius of the Black preacher, as W.B. Boyd says, that we have done a great job of reacting, and we react to circumstances that are plaguing our communities. We react in a major way. I think we have to reimagine, as President Williams say, how do we move from a reactive approach to theological ministry to a proactive approach, creating spaces with our own communities where we are self-sustainable, where we don't have to rely on outside persons and outside systems and outside institutions who really don't share our values, who really don't care for us intimately. How do we create this space in the Black church where we are educating our children, our own children, we're feeding our own children, and we're growing our communities from the inside out and not the outside in?
Wow, brother, thank you. Today is also the 29th anniversary of Reverend Williams answering his call to the ministry and doing his first sermon. After he did his first sermon, he asked his mother, how did he do? And his mother said, you will do better the next time. So you've done quite well the next time, my brother. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. President, you get the final closing words for this session. You all have been so generous with your time, and I'm so grateful to you for that. But President Williams, give us your final closing thoughts, okay?
Well, first I want to say again how grateful I am, Dr. Mason, Brother Skip, for setting up this conversation and just giving us a platform to love on this beloved institution we call the ITC. And again, I'm so grateful for my friends and colleagues and classmates for this time to share with you. So I also want to note something from the clip that you showed that is coming up. I'm really interested and eager to see it. Because what I appreciated about that clip was that it showed that the documentary intends not just to celebrate the Black church, but also to engage the Black church critically in terms of areas where we've fallen short, right? And lift up some important questions about the ways in which the church and leadership in the church can lead the church to be the church that Jesus called out, the ecclesia in Matthew 16, right? And so I'm thinking about your question in terms of why seminary, right? Why, let me put it differently, why Black theological education? And I would say it's because Black theological education at the ITC gives us an opportunity to ask questions about first principles. And what I mean by that is many times when we are participating in church and the way we do church, we confuse the purposes for which we do what we do with the forms through which we do what we do. So that when we get into a moment like this, where we cannot enter a building or unless there's a threat of our very death, then if we've confused the purpose of our work being getting together with the liturgy looking a certain way, with our routines looking a certain way, then we can't possibly imagine what it means to actually be the church in a different kind of environment. We can't imagine, as Dr. Slaughter said, what it would mean to be a pastor where the preached word is not the most important and primary thing, and not the most important and primary function of a pastor or in ministry, right? But if you have the opportunity to ask that first question that Dr. Slaughter and Dr. Williams mentioned, who am I? Who am I really? And how has God called me to serve, to lead, to be in ministry with my people, then that sets the groundwork for us to ask this question. And that is, Jesus said in Matthew 16, upon this rock, I'll build my church. So then the question becomes, what does it mean to follow in the way of a North African Messiah who was lynched in an empire that in very many ways is mimicked by the empire we're in now? First principles. What does it mean to follow in the way of Jesus, who was lynched in an empire, and now we're in an empire that is taken after some of those patterns of Rome, right? John Dominic Crossan wrote a book called Jesus Against Rome, Then and Now, God and Empire, right? So asking those critical questions helps us to, one, clarify who we are in relationship to the eternal. And then now, how does that impact how we embody what it means to be the body of Christ, right? To be the ecclesia, the called out ones, right? And so I'm going to repeat what my daddy said when I was coming to seminary. I can tell what you think about the people that you serve by how well you prepare to serve them. So, if you're interested in just being called doc or reverend, or rising to some level of power that will feed your own ego, that's one thing, but that's not what seminary is for. I heard somebody say, it's one thing to go through seminary, but seminary's got to go through you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this invitation is, right? That's what this invitation is. So we invite you to the ITC. We invite you to Phillips School of Theology to clarify, who am I in relationship to my God?
That's right.
In relationship to my Christ. And now, how is God calling me into the world to serve and to lead my people?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, President Williams, Dr. Slaughter, Reverend Williams, Reverend Walker, Reverend Dr. Green. I'm so grateful to you for your time and for really just sharing your insight into this great institution called the ITC. And we appreciate you tremendously. And we pray God's blessings upon you, President Williams, as you continue to lead our alma mater and our institution. And certainly we acknowledge Jefferson Snorton and other members of the CME Church who serve on the board of trustees for ITC. This concludes our CME150 Facebook Live conversation. I'm certain that Reverend Dr. Anita Green will want all ITC alumni to be active, engaged, and involved. And is there a website for alumni, or how do they reach you if they want to become more active or involved?
Well, you can go on the ITC website. There's a page for alumni relations. You can click on that. You can pay your dues of $50, either that way or by Cash App, which is $ ITC in capital letters, alumni, the A in capital letters, and then association ASS in capital ASSN 2020. You can also email me, find me on Facebook. We try to update the ITC alumni Facebook page every now and then with any information, but we just need your help. The Alumni Association has always been there, but we're just trying to not rebrand in a sense, but we just want to to do the work that we've been called to do as alumni, to give back to ITC. So those are the ways that you can look me up. There are also volunteer opportunities with the admissions office. They're looking for people to they're looking for alumni to make calls to prospective students. So make sure you call the office. Also, we're working with the Office of Institutional Advancement. So please, whatever you can do, just reach out to me. We're in the process of getting T-shirts to sell. So we need help with that if you'd like to volunteer. So I thank you to those who have been reaching out to me to pay their dues and what they've said to give back to ITC. So it's not an overnight process. We're working on it. We're looking to have alumni chapel in April of this year. We're also looking to have a monthly nighttime alumni service. So we're just trying to do some exciting things. Again, it's not an overnight process. Work with us, pray for us, and just reach out and volunteer however you can. We would greatly appreciate it. Again, dues are $50, and we just look forward to making sure you update your information as well. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. Both President Williams, who's a published author, you can find this on his Facebook page for further information, or call the school. And of course, Dr. Slaughter made reference to his book, Therapeutic Dimensions of Black Preaching. And so we are grateful to you all. We're going to conclude with this piece. You all have a blessed day, and we will see you next Sunday earlier because it's Super Bowl for another CME Facebook Live conversation. Have a blessed week.
Throughout this country, in every field, institutions are undergoing a moment of destabilization. And much of this destabilization is due to the fact that the world has changed. The ground has shifted. This is a different moment, and it requires us to imagine differently how we carry forward the legacies that have been bequeathed to us. Some see this as a crisis. Here at the ITC, we see this as an opportunity to sankofa, to go back and fetch the ingenuity, the wisdom, and the imagination of our ancestors in order to forge a path toward a future for our people. That's why at the ITC, the crisis narrative is over. I'm convinced that many of the problems that we face are not a matter of a lack of resources. It's a matter of a lack of imagination. So I'm here to say welcome to the ITC 2.0. Our task is not to save the ITC as we know it. Our task is to co-create the ITC that our communities and our churches need. This is the work of a village, and we want to invite you to be a part of that village. Today marks the launch of the ITC 2.0 Village campaign. We are enlisting over 1,000 people, allies and alumni, to be a part of this process of reimagining and innovation at this institution.